The Scarlet Woman by Fenton Johnson, 1888 to 1958. Once I was good like the Virgin Mary and the banjo player's wife. My father worked for Mr. Pullman and white people's tips, but he died 2 days after his insurance expired. I had nothing, so I had to work. All the stock I had was a white girl's education and a face that enchanted men of both races. Starvation danced with me. So when Big Lizzie, who kept a house for white men, came to me with tales of fortune that I could reap from the sale of my virtue, I bowed my head to vice. Now I can drink more gin than any man for miles around. Gin is better than all the water in Lethe. Okay, this is a poem by Fenton Johnson. Fenton Johnson came from Chicago in the United States, and he was a poet. He wrote short stories. He was an editor and also a teacher at times as well. He came from a middle-class African-American family in Chicago. They were probably upper middle class. They owned their own house on State Street in the center of Chicago. He's known for his prose poetry. His poetry, it's not something that rhymes. It's something that it says what it is. And James Weldon Johnson was a big fan of his. Weldon Johnson called him the first Negro revolutionary poet, and Fenton Johnson is is a forerunner perhaps of the Harlem Resistance. I've called him the Harlem Renaissance. I've heard him called the Chicago Renaissance as well. So what's this about? Well, this is about a girl who her father worked, and her father looked after her, and her father brought her up to be a good person and gave her a good education and taught her how to be a good person. But then her father died, and her father died just after the life insurance had run out, and therefore she got nothing. And suddenly this woman is destitute, and she says that the only thing she had were a white girl's education. At this time, I think it was not easy, firstly, for women to get jobs. It's not the same as today, that women were considered were considered people who looked after the home, not who worked. And even to make it even harder, she was a black woman, and it was impossible for her to get a job. And then she says the other thing she had was she was attractive. She was attracted to attractive to both black and white men, and she starves. She gets hungry and hungrier, and eventually someone called Lizzie, Big Lizzie, says to her, "You can make a lot of money if you sell your virtue, if you become a prostitute, if you come and work for me in my whorehouse." And she does so, and she finds a way of making her living, and she becomes an alcoholic. She drinks huge amounts of gin, and she says that gin helps her forget all of the injustice. And I think this poem, it's talking about inevitability of African Americans following the stereotype that there are no chances, no possibilities for African Americans to break the mold. And this is incredibly unfair, that there are literally no opportunities for black people, and following the stereotype is the only way out. It's the only thing they can do. There is no other possibility. Once I was good like the Virgin Mary and the banjo player's wife. So once she was a good, moral, upright person. My father worked for Mr. Pullman and white people's tips. So my father worked for Mr. Pullman. I think Mr. Pullman, this is talking about the Pullman factory. These were Pullman sleeping cars on the railroad, and these were actually built in Chicago. Or maybe her father worked on the railroad, and her father also received tips from white people. But he died 2 days after his insurance expired. But when he died, his life insurance wasn't valid. I had nothing, so I had to go to work. So she had to work because there is nobody to support her. All the stock I had was a white girl's education and a face that enchanted the men of both races. So she has a white girl's education. She's well educated. She is knowledgeable, but there is no possibility of her getting a job. It would be difficult enough if she was white to get a job. But being a black girl, impossible to get a good job. And she was also pretty. She was attractive to both black and white men. Starvation danced with me. This is the important line. She's starving. She doesn't have enough food. So when Big Lizzie, who kept a house for white men, came to me with tales of fortune that I could reap from the sale of my virtue, I bowed my head to vice. So Big Lizzie has a brothel for white men, and Big Lizzie says you can make a lot of money if you sell your virtue, if you sell your body. So she gave in, and I think she feels that she had no other alternative. This was the only thing that was possible, and hence the lack of opportunity turns the cycle again. Now I can drink more gin than any man for miles around. So now she can drink and drink and drink. Gin is better than all the water in Lethe. The river Lethe is one of the rivers in the underworld in Greek mythology, and the Lethe is where the souls of the dead drink, and they forget the world of the living. They forget their previous lives, and the Lethe, the water in the Lethe, if you drink from this is the water of forgetfulness. And she's drinking to forget the injustice, to forget what has happened to her, to forget the lack of opportunities which have driven her to this state. So, The Scarlet Woman by Fenton Johnson.